is that every month we have different Zoom sessions where there's opportunities for our staff and for our young leaders to come together, and that it's a combination of educational learning and also opportunities for our staff and our young leaders to help us with planning with camp and providing feedback and insight. And this really comes from a lot of the feedback that you all shared with me last spring, and discussions that we had for those of you who are at camp this summer, and the feedback that we got from the staff survey. So welcome. And I am really excited that our first guest tonight is Alan Freeman. Alan and I had the pleasure of having some coffee together a couple of weeks ago, and we dreamed up this idea of really thinking about a way to support our staff in their application process for camp this summer. So one of the things that we're most excited about is that some of you haven't been staff at all, and some of you haven't been staff since 2019, which means that there's a fresh blank slate for everyone. There's a new story to tell. And that means that everyone can apply for any position that they want, unless there is an age restriction or a requirement of a certification. And so tonight, the goal is about you getting to hear and work with Alan and learn about how to write a resume and how to get ready to apply for a job at camp or elsewhere in the world, and how to work on your interview skills. So I'm going to stay totally silent. This is for you guys and Alan to work together. And again, welcome. And I'm so excited that we're going to kick off our 2021 season with all of you and Alan tonight. So thank you, Alan.
Sure. So thanks, Lori. First of all, thanks everybody for actually showing your video. I should say almost everybody. Isabel and shockingly my own son are refusing to share their video. I can only imagine the faces that Matthew is making right now. I think it's really important. One thing Lori said is really important is that this is not just about how to apply for a job at CSL. It really is much broader than that. I've been doing interviews in a number of contexts. I'm the hiring partner for my law firm. For our Washington office, so I've been interviewing law students for years now. I interview lawyers who are applying to be admitted to practice law in Maryland. And for probably 10 years now, I've run the national interview program for high school students who are applying to Columbia University. So I have some perspective on this. And one thing that has become very clear to me is that most kids graduating high school, their first few years of college, really have very little to no experience interviewing. They don't know how to do it. You've never had to do it. For a lot of you, your college interviews will be your first interviews, or those of you already in college, you may have had a college interview, but a lot of colleges aren't doing them anymore. So you get to a place where you are right now, whether it's applying to CSL or internships or jobs, and you've never done this before. You've never done a resume before. And, the unfortunate thing is they're really, really important parts of your professional life. And you need to think very carefully about it. So as Lori said, the idea behind this was to kind of give you a value add. It's Camp Sun Up Lake is not just about your time, in the villages and on camp. It's you're a camper for 8, 9, 10 years, but you're going to be a CSL alum for much longer than that. And we want you to be prepared for the 50, 60, 70 years after your Tusk summer. So what I want to do is break this down into 2 sections, really, and it absolutely is open for questions. Feel free to just unmute yourself, ask a question, jump in. I don't care about being, cut off. That's fine. It's not a problem. Some of you have known since you were, 8, 9 years old. So it's not a problem. So first of all, let's talk about resume. I think the interesting thing about your generation is you're different than mine. For my generation, a resume meant a piece of paper that said everything I'd done in college or high school and activities, grades, things like that. For your generation, your resume is actually much more broad than a piece of paper. It includes, frankly, anything you put online, okay? Your social media accounts, any websites that quote you or cite you, Instagram, anything online is actually part of your resume. And I say that because different employers have different policies about Google searching applicants for jobs. There are some companies that have a policy that prohibit people from Google searching an applicant, but there are other companies that absolutely do it. So it is important for all of you, if you're not already doing it, to think very carefully about your privacy settings on all your social media accounts. And even if you've got your privacy settings set as protectively as possible, you still need to be really thoughtful about what you're putting out there, whether it's on, I mean, I'd say Facebook, but I'm sure none of you use Facebook anymore. But whether it's Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, be mindful of the fact that people are going to screenshot you. Other people may be able to link to your profiles, and they're going to consider anything that you put out online as part of your resume. So that's kind of the public service announcement part of resume building. There are obviously two primary official resume sources. One is LinkedIn, and one is the piece of paper. Now, those of you who are in college already, and I know some of you are, you may already have LinkedIn profiles. If you don't, I think you should set one up. Those of you who are still in high school, you don't need one yet. But those of you who are in college, now's the right time. And what you want to do with LinkedIn is the exact same thing that you want to do with a paper resume. That you need to treat that document as if it is the only document that a prospective employer is going to look at when deciding whether or not to give you an interview. For most of the jobs you guys are applying to, there are going to be 100 or more applicants for every one position. And the employers don't have time to interview everybody. So what they're doing is they're going to look at your LinkedIn profile, they're going to look at that one piece of paper, and they're going to make a decision based on that one piece of paper whether to give you an interview, which is a really daunting thing, right? It means you've got to get out there in LinkedIn or one piece of paper all the reasons that they should take an interest in you. So how do you do that? First of all, you have to think very broadly about your experience, about what you've done in life, and you've got to be a little creative about it. I'll just give you a couple examples that you're all familiar with. You may think Camp Seneca Lake, all right, I was a camp counselor. I was in Onondaga, I was Cayuga. What does that tell an employer? Well, if you just write down overnight camp counselor, you're right, it doesn't say very much. But think about what it means to be a camp counselor. And I actually recently had an opportunity, a former CSL counselor that I've been mentoring put me down as a reference. And a prospective employer called me and asked me, well, what can you tell me about, so-and-so's, project management skills and people management skills? And I thought for a second, and it occurred to me, well, anybody who's got to manage 8 or 9, 10-year-old boys and get them from Cayuga to General Swim, back down to the waterfront, and then cleaned up, showered, ready for the fire circle and Shabbat. That's serious people management skills. That's not easy. Getting people, getting 8, 9, 10-year-olds organized and motivated, working in the same direction. Those of you who've been counselors before, but those of you who are campers, think about everything that goes into Color War, a mass program, getting a disparate group of kids to pull together in the same direction, doing something they've never done before. That's project management. That's people management. That's leadership. So what you need to do is think about those things that you've done, whether it's at camp, whether it's creating a club at school, whether it's working on the student newspaper. Think about the things you actually do in those roles. And that's what needs to be on your resume, not just the job title, but the explanation of what it actually meant to perform that job, because it's going to be different at different places. And you need to think of your resume as your one shot to tell the reader why you're somebody worth taking a chance on. Those of you who may be on varsity teams at school, whether it's high school or college, I mean, that is time management and commitment. And even if you're not on the varsity team, let's say you've played, club sports, your entire childhood right up through high school. Those of you who are playing club sports in college, that's a serious time commitment. I will tell you that as a hiring partner of a law firm, I absolutely give very serious consideration to college athletes. Now, I don't care whether it's D1 or D3, and I don't care whether it's football or volleyball. What matters to me is that if you're actually able to manage a practice schedule and a game schedule and your grades, you know how to manage your time. You know how to juggle responsibilities. Same thing goes for high school, though. Whatever activities you're in, the ability to juggle your responsibilities for those activities with your schoolwork is something that's really important to employers. So you want to find a way to articulate that in your resume, what your time commitments are and how you manage them. So that's kind of the substance. I mean, there are basics about a resume. You need to talk about your education. You need to talk about the activities you're involved in. You need to talk about internships, and you need to talk about volunteer activities. The volunteering is really important, and you need to think expansively here. Volunteering doesn't have to mean you do it 5 days a week. If you do it once a week for 6 weeks, but it's a really intense activity, it needs to go on your resume, because employers more and more want to see that the people they're hiring, they're not just smart. They're not just going to come to work in the morning and go home at night. They want to see that they're actively involved in their communities. So think very broadly about what it is that you're doing to support your community, no matter how big or how small. So that's kind of the substance of resumes. And I know I'm flying through this quickly, and I do want you to be able to ask questions at a certain point. But those are the big picture items. None of it matters, though, if you don't get the blocking and tackling correct. You've got to do the small stuff well. What do I mean by that? You have to spell check everything. You have to get the grammar right. You have to get the punctuation right, and it's got to be consistent. What do I mean by consistent? It's either got to be present tense or it's past tense. But if you keep going back and forth within the document, the reader's going to pick up on that. Attention to detail is critically important, because the reality is, for most of you, for most internships and jobs that you apply to, the other applicants are going to be just as qualified as you. They're going to have the same experience as you. They're going to have good grades too. They will have done neat things in their life, and they'll be actively involved in their community. You guys know all your colleagues from camp who are going to be applying for the same jobs at camp. What's going to make the difference? Well, unfortunately, a lot of times, my personal experience is that if I have 100 applications for a job at my law firm this summer, and I only have one opening available, the odds are 90 of those applicants would do a great job. So I've got to find a way to cut through 90 resumes. I can't interview 90 people. So I look for the people who made mistakes. I look for people who have typos in their resume, who have poor grammar in their resume, and I throw those resumes out. To be perfectly honest, they don't even get a shot, because I have to make difficult choices. And every job you apply to, somebody's making a difficult choice. So proofread once, proofread twice, then ask a parent to proofread a few times, maybe ask a friend. I mean, you cannot proofread these documents enough. They're your one chance to make a first impression. And I can't overstate it. The other thing I'll say in terms of preparing your resume, stick to active voice if you can. difference between active and passive voice may not seem like a lot to you, but to me and to most people reading a resume, it makes a big difference. Active voice sounds aggressive, in charge, powerful, in command. Passive voice sounds more like you allow things to happen to you. And most employers don't want somebody who allows things to happen to them. Most employers want people who are going to take charge, whatever the issue is. Somebody who's actively engaged, somebody who's proactive. Your use of tense and voice actually makes a difference. May sound crazy, but it does. So those are kind of nuts and bolts of the resume. Big picture, big bullets. Think expansively about your experience. Explain your experience. Tell the reader what it actually means to have been a counselor at camp. And get the grammar, punctuation, and spelling correct. I am flying through this. I apologize for that, but we do want to keep this to an hour. I was going to jump into interview skills next, but does anybody have any questions about resume, whether it's the paper resume, the electronic resume through LinkedIn, or anything else like that? Oh, now Lori tells me that we're recording this.
I probably should have asked for permission. Sorry. Better to ask for forgiveness. I made Janie laugh. That was good. Janie knows my humor, so she laughed. Don't be afraid to ask questions, guys.
So if any of you don't feel like asking a question in this environment, which I totally get, nobody really likes to be the person who asks a question on a mass Zoom call. You can definitely feel free to email, text me. Lori can certainly give you my contact information. Although some of you, Josh Cohn, seem to be talking on a phone into my house 5 or 6 nights a week as it is. So I know Josh definitely knows how to get in touch with me.
Alan, the other option is if you have a question and maybe you're not comfortable asking it, you can privately send it to me and then I can read it out loud and I won't say who it's from. So that's also an option.
And you can also, throw a question up in the chat room if you want, because I've got that open. But okay, so let's. So
I've actually I've got one.
Yeah.
In terms of resume formatting, like how do you want to format your resume? Because I know there's cover letters and all that kind of stuff, like references and past experiences that you'd want to put. And I was just wondering what a good format for it would be in terms of ordering things.
Sure. So first of all, I would put your education up front, then go to employment, and then go to activities. There's not really any great magic to that, but that's how I would structure it. But it actually brings up a really good point that I should have made. Email addresses. You're going to want to put both your snail mail address in the header at the top of the resume, but also your email address, because most employers are going to be reaching out to you via email. It is important that your email address sound professional. Okay. What do I mean by that? I've got 3 email addresses. One of my email addresses is a goofy name. That is not the email address that I would ever put on a resume. Okay. My goofy email address is FreeDaddy. I would never put that on a resume. My resume email address is Alan93C@Outlook. Very conservative, simple, straightforward. You should think about that. Have an email address that is the one you use for your resumes. That is the one that you give to employers, that you put on applications, that sort of projects a more serious professional tone. The other thing with formatting of your resume, 1 page. All of you are amazing, but none of you needs more than 1 page for your resume at this stage of your life. I was, practicing law 20 years before it made sense for me to spill over onto a 2nd page. Okay. Find a way to keep it to 1 page. Most readers aren't going to give you more than 1 page of time anyway. You do not want to have really small font. So the reality is you should be able to get away with 1 page, 12-point Times New Roman font. That should be enough for all of you. If you need to shrink the font down smaller than 12-point at your age, it probably means you're putting too many words on the page. And that's something that you should think about editing. I am a big fan of Times New Roman. I think, something like Arial doesn't really look professional on a resume. That may just be a style point or a preference of mine on my part, but I think 1 page Times New Roman 12-point. I would not fully justify it. I'd keep it left justified, so that you don't, screw up the. It just the lines can look a little awkward if you try and fully justify both margins of a resume. So I'd argue against that. There are two schools of thought on whether you should put interests on a resume, and what I mean by that are, I still get resumes in my law firm, people who say, hobbies, and they'll write things like, cooking and taking long walks on the beach. And, I read those lines, and honestly, 9 times out of 10, my reaction is, that's stupid. I'm not, that's my personal reaction. What I would suggest to you is, if you're going to put an interest on there, it's got to be more than just a passing hobby. And perhaps more importantly than that, it's got to be something you're willing to talk about in an interview. Because when somebody does put an interest on a resume and I give them an interview, I promise you, I'm going to ask them about that interest. And if they don't have a really good, thoughtful, creative story to tell me about that interest, they've lost me. So if it's that important to put on your resume, be prepared to talk about it. Don't just put down there, something like, I like watching sports. Really? All right. So does, 90% of America. You're not special. Move on. But if you created, a blog that follows, the Bills, and you've got 2 million followers, that's something to talk about. So you got to be really thoughtful about that special hobbies and interests line. I can tell you, I've been doing this a long time. I have never used that line on a resume. Maybe it's just because I don't have anything that special that I'm interested in. But I would be really, really careful about putting that out there. They will ask you about that. The other thing to be really careful about is putting down language fluency. If you put, fluency in, Spanish, French, Hebrew, whatever it is, be prepared for the interviewer to conduct your interview in that language. Okay? They will call your bluff if you put that on a resume. So if you're not fluent, but you want to show that you have some capability, some facility, the thing you can say is you can write conversational. Basically, conversational means, yeah, I can get myself through a market and a half. If I'm conversational Hebrew, it means I can navigate my way around a shuk in Jerusalem. I can get myself from A to B. But there's a big difference between conversational and fluency. You need to be very thoughtful about using those two terms. Most interviewers aren't looking to trick you, but they are going to want to confirm skills that you're putting out there as being significant. I hope that helps, Sam. Was that responsive?
Yeah, that was pretty helpful. Another thing I would like to know is, I don't know about any of the rest of you guys, but I've worked, I've gotten a few jobs by now, including this. Is it like, would I want to limit the amount of experience that I put down on there to like just things that are very relevant, or would like anything help at this point?
I lean more towards anything helps. I think you have to be a bit thoughtful, though. I mean, a job you had for, 30 days, over winter break may not be as significant, but at your stage, employers are expecting that you're going to be trying lots of different things and that you're going to have lots of different experiences. And the experiences you get in lots of different environments are helpful. For example, you may think that the fact that you worked a retail job during your senior year of high school is not relevant to the fact that you're applying for, let's say a management trainee position at M&T Bank, but it is. Retail jobs are really, really helpful on a resume because dealing with customers is not easy. It's a skill, and it's a skill that most employers are going to recognize as valuable almost no matter what the job is. So if you can keep it to one page, Sam, without dropping your font too small, I would err on the side of putting more job experience on rather than less.
Thank you. I was just wondering, because specifically I'm going to be applying to power companies soon, that I wasn't sure if I should put down my experience as being a salad bar jockey would be a good idea.
So power companies, and I happen to have one as a client, there are few businesses out there that field more angry telephone calls than the electricity company. Think about when the power goes out. I mean, there are few of us. I mean, down here in Maryland, that seems to happen, every 20 minutes during the winter, and everybody picks up the phone and calls and complains. So if you've got experience as a salad bar jockey dealing with people who are angry about why, where are the tomatoes? I mean, you may think it's silly, but your ability to deal with angry people is relevant. How you deal with it. And look, those of you who have been and will be counselors, dealing with, parents like me on visiting day, that's not easy. Parents come at drop off and they have demands. Parents come at visiting day, they have demands. And some of you, particularly unit heads, may have to interface with those parents. That's customer service. Don't undervalue how important that can be to an employer, the fact that you've dealt with that. And as you write about your experience at CSL as staff, think about what it means to be a counselor. If you're a counselor, that means that parents have entrusted you with the things that are most important in their lives. And they basically handed their kids off to you and said, take care of my child, even though they don't know you. I mean, think about how powerful that is. Think about the level of trust and responsibility that all of you have as counselors, and then figure out how you write about that. Once you realize, some of you for the first time, just how much trust parents are putting in you, it may help you write about just how significant your job as counselors is. And frankly, you can ride that in a resume and in a job interview. Absolutely, no question about it. But Sam, that's why you got to think expansively. All these jobs that you've had along the way, you are getting skills, and the trick in a resume is explaining why those skills are valuable to the next person who's going to hire you. So let's talk a little about interviewing next, and we can definitely come back to resumes if you want. So rule number one of interviewing is it's not just the interview, okay? Most of the time, you're going to find out you got an interview either by a phone call or maybe a letter asking you to call to schedule a time. So what that means is if you have a mobile phone, your voicemail needs to be set up. You need to have a responsible professional message on your voicemail, and you need to check your voicemail. It also means you need to check your email. Now, why am I saying it like this? Because I know your generation lives on text messaging, not emails and not voicemails. But my generation, the generation that's actually going to be hiring you, We use voicemails and we use emails. We generally don't, grant interviews by text message. But if I call you to schedule an interview and I get your voicemail and it sounds juvenile, it makes an impression on me. Okay. It's good, bad, right, wrong. We may think it's silly, but it does make an impression. If you don't return my voicemail within 24 hours, you are really hurting yourself. Same thing with email. You've got to return emails and voicemails quickly. That honestly, that should apply all the time, but it definitely applies with job interviews. Respond quickly. That is part of your interview. It's part of the test. You also need to think about, honestly, every adult interaction you have is a form of interview. Every time you're meeting with, speaking with a potential employer, they're sizing you up. They're making an assessment of how you carry yourself. Are you a serious person? Do you know when to get serious? Do you know the difference between the right time and the wrong time to be cracking jokes? Quite honestly, camp and applying for camp jobs is the perfect example of this issue. So, the thing about camp is you all grow up together at camp. And the senior staff, you've grown up with the senior staff together. I don't know who will be doing the interviews for the summer positions this year, but they may be people that you've known for 5, 10 years or more. You have to recognize that just because you've known somebody in a very casual, friendly environment at camp for 10 years doesn't mean that you can be super casual and dismissive of them during an interview. You have to recognize during an interview that you're being sized up, and it's whether it's Lori or Neil or anybody else. Just because you've known someone for a long time doesn't mean that you can be anything less than perfectly professional, either when they call you for an interview, during the interview, or even before the interview. Even if you're just calling to ask somebody what a job would be like. There are lots of things called informational interviews where you're just meeting with somebody. It's not a job interview, but you're finding out about a position. You're networking. You have to treat those just like job interviews. So I've fielded lots of calls over the years from former CSL counselors who want to go to law school, want to be lawyers. The odds are they're never going to apply for a job with me or my law firm. But they have to treat me, they have to speak to me as if it's a job interview, because 2-3 years down the road, I may be getting a call for a reference. Okay. All your camp friends' parents, treat them like job interviews. They're sizing you up now. There's stuff you could get away with adults when you were 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. Now you're all 17, 18, 20, 21 years old. People are sizing you up now. So the job interview, what I want you to walk away from this recognizing is the job interview is much more than just sitting across the table and interviewing. It starts long before then. That's when the impressions are made. But let's talk about the actual interview itself. And frankly, all of this applies to college interviews as well. So those of you who are in the process of scheduling those for the 2 or 3 schools in the country that still do them. Some of this should seem obvious, but I'm gonna tell you anyway, because I've seen lots of examples, both professionally and also for Columbia, that have just shocked me. Okay, dress nicely. You should not wear a t-shirt. I don't care about COVID. I don't care whether the job interview is in person or by video. You should not be wearing a t-shirt. You should not be wearing a hoodie. You should not be wearing a baseball hat. I don't care who you're interviewing with. You should always have a collared shirt or a nice shirt. I totally understand women's clothing doesn't necessarily have a collar, doesn't have to have a collar to be nice, but you get it, right? No t-shirts, no baseball hats. I used to say shave, but I can't get away with that anymore because I haven't been clean shaven in about a year. But what I will say is groom yourselves, trim, brush your hair. And it doesn't matter who you're interviewing with or what the job is. It goes for camp as well as it does for a college interview. You gotta look nice. You gotta look like you care. There's an old story about, dress for the job you want, not the job you have. Interviewing is just like that. You want to impress people that you took the time, that you view the job so seriously that you took the time to dress up. And that's a bit of a challenge during COVID, right? Because a lot of us are quarantined and we are dressing more casually than we usually do. I know I am. But that doesn't mean you don't dress up for certain events. I think your generation is going to be doing many more interviews by video. That didn't even exist when I was in college, high school, law school, but it's standard now. So there's some things you have to do to prepare for video interviews, okay? Number one, you need to be in a quiet room. You need to be in a place where you can close the door and have some peace and quiet. You need to have a neutral Zoom background, okay? Whether it's Zoom or Teams. So I'm obviously using my CSL waterfront background because it's a CSL call and I can get away with it. But for all my work calls, I have a neutral background. And ideally, look, it's not necessarily a problem for you to not have a background at all. But if you don't use an artificial background, I strongly recommend that you be very, very careful about what is in the background within the screenshot. And I'm gonna pick on Sam Luxembourg a little bit because I've known Sam since he was little, so I can get away with this. So
that's not my side of the room. I just want to preface that's my roommate's side.
All right. So the fact that Sam knew where I was going with that, yeah,
it's a mess over there.
Looks a little messy, right? So an interviewer doesn't know that that's Sam's roommate's mess, right? You want to make, interviewers are going to be looking for little things, and messiness is one of the things they're going to look at. Looking around this group, I don't know whether anyone is 21, but you definitely shouldn't have a Bush Light banner in the background, even if you are 21. Even college students, I get it, but you need to have neutral backgrounds. You don't want to be sending unintended messages about yourself, about your habits, about your interests, because people are getting a window into your life through these video interviews now. You got to be really careful about that. Check your technology, test it beforehand. Check your speaker, check everything. Do a dry run with, a brother, a sister, a parent. Make sure it works. You do not want to find out 30 seconds before the interview that the technology is not working. By the same token, if you have an interview in person, and those will come back, if the interview's at 1 o'clock, you make sure you're outside that building 30 minutes early. No questions, 30 minutes early. Because whether you live in Buffalo, Pittsburgh, or Washington, D.C., you don't know what's going to happen on your way to the interview. There could be an accident. There could be any number of things could happen to delay you. And I promise you, there is nothing worse for the impression you make than being late to an interview. So what I have always done for meetings generally, whether, and I travel a lot for my job. So I'm frequently going to meetings in cities I've never been to before. If I've got a meeting in a particular building, I'll look to figure out where the closest coffee shop is. And I go to that coffee shop 30 minutes early. So I know that there's somewhere I can go 30 minutes early that I can be ready. Because I will never be late for a meeting. It's just not going to happen. And none of you are ever going to be late for a meeting. But you got to find those plot your routes out, do all of that in advance so that you're early. That being said, do not walk into up to the reception desk of the interviewer 30 minutes early, because that will drive your interviewer nuts. I absolutely can't stand it. If I've got a 1 p.m. interview and I get a call from a reception that says the person arrived 30 minutes early, my reaction is, well, that's great. I've got things to do. Why are they here now? I said 1 o'clock. So if you get there early, just go to the coffee shop downstairs, hang out there for 20 minutes, come upstairs maybe 5 minutes before the interview and check in at reception then. Obviously with Zoom, that's not nearly as big a deal. But it's this idea of being prompt, whether it's responding to emails, responding to voicemails, showing up for the interview. Plan ahead, guys, because even if they're not trying to test you, if you screw up, it ends up becoming a test that you didn't pass. Do your research. Do your research. Whatever organization you're interviewing with, whether it's camp. I know Lori put out the playbook yesterday, and you've all probably read that, and certainly before your interviews you will read that, so you're going to understand all the various changes that are happening for camp this summer. But the same thing goes for any internship, any job you apply for. Do your research about the organization, about the office, and about the position, so that when you come in, you're asking smart questions, and you're asking questions that aren't answered on the website already. That drives people nuts, drives me nuts when somebody comes in and interviews and asks a question that I know is on our website. Why are you wasting my time? Same thing for colleges. Ask the questions during those interviews that you don't know the answers to, but do your research to find out how employers talk about themselves, how colleges talk about themselves. You will learn a lot. There will be some companies out there that really put a heavy emphasis on their role in the community, not their profit motive, but on giving back. Okay, well, that's really important. That's good information for you to have, because it helps you talk about yourself. It helps you highlight the things about you that you think are going to be particularly interesting to them. That's what I mean by do your research first. And then little tips that I've sort of picked up over the years. So, I do a lot of public speaking, but I always get a little knot in my stomach before I have to talk, whether it's in court, whether it's a speech. That knot in your stomach tells you care. It's not a problem to get nervous. Sometimes your voice your mouth will get dry, your throat will get dry. Maybe your hands get a little clammy and sweaty. I know Lori's nodding. Like, everybody's body reacts differently to stress. Everybody is differently able to process the anxiety of public speaking and an interview. And I promise you, you'll get nervous. Figure out what works for you to deal with that. I can tell you that the 3 things that have always worked for me is I always have a bottle of water with me, whether I'm in court or giving a speech, doesn't matter. I have a bottle of water with me. Here tonight, I've got a glass of water. Well, you can't see it because of the green screen. I've got a glass of water. Most of the time, I never open the bottle of water. It sits in my briefcase. But psychologically, I know it's there if I need it. In court, I always have a packet of lifesavers in my pocket. Same thing. It's psychological. I know that if my mouth gets dry, as I'm getting nervous before making an oral argument, I've got the packet of lifesavers. Lifesavers work. If you need heavy duty, my tip number 3, Ricola cough drops. They're like super, super heavy duty throat lozenges, and they work. The issue is you've got to figure out kind of where your nerves are and what are the things that are going to help you relax. Those things work for me. They may not work for you, maybe something else for you. Most employers, most people who are interviewing you are going to expect you to be nervous, okay? Nerves mean you care. What you've got to figure out is what works for you to plow through those nerves, to kind of get over that initial speed bump. Once you get talking, you'll be fine. Question is, how do you get over that speed bump? And the last thing I'll say is practice. Do practice interviews, whether it's for college or a job. Practice with somebody, whether it's a parent or a friend. Have them ask you some questions. Just get practice speaking out loud. I know it's really easy to say, well, I can go through all the information in my head. There's nothing like practicing talking out loud. It's really helpful. It's, I know it sounds goofy to actually do it, but it's helpful. So that's interviews in, 20 minutes. And I plowed through a lot of material there. Any questions there? Oh, come on, can't be that easy.
And again, feel free if you want to send it privately through the chat to me, I can ask it without saying it out loud if you're feeling uncomfortable.
I guess I have a question, just because we're meeting on Zoom and a lot of the meetings are going to occur on, or interviews will occur on Zoom. But besides that, even before the pandemic, I did some interviews with HireVue, and so that's where they record you ahead of time, and there's a prompt. It's either a pre-recorded video or a message for those of you guys who don't know what HireVue is. But one of the really interesting things is I interviewed with one firm where they said not only would they look at your responses, but they had a computer algorithm to make sure that you were maintaining eye contact and using good body language and all that kind of stuff. So I guess, Alan, I was wondering how much you've run across that and kind of tips you have for when you have one of those situations.
So, I mean, I'll confess, I've done maybe 2 or 3 video interviews pre-COVID. We generally fly people in, and if they can't come meet with us, you know what, I got 100 people who will. So, eye contact on a video is kind of easy because you're looking straight ahead. You're looking into the camera. There's nowhere else to go. You're not reading off a script. But there's no question that if you're meeting with somebody in person, you gotta look them in the eye. You have to. If you're down like this the whole time, most jobs, you're not gonna have a chance. You gotta look people in the eye. You gotta be comfortable doing that. If you come in with a lot of notes, you're gonna read your notes and you're gonna have poor eye contact. And Josh, I mean, you're competing against people who are just as qualified as you are. That's, for all of you, you're going to be competing against people who are just as qualified. So, employers are looking to make fine line distinctions, and somebody who's not making eye contact, somebody who's slouching, who's kind of slumped down in their seat, leaning back, it doesn't, it doesn't mean that you're not serious, but if you're being compared against somebody who's got really good posture, who's sort of seated up forward, looking you in the eye, that person, that person's going to win out. HireVue is tough. I think the thing I don't like about that is the recording. To me, that's not an interview, that's a speech. And I much prefer interviews that are discussions. And I will tell you, I mean, and this is something you should be prepared for, all of you. People have different approaches towards conducting interviews. Some people will interview you based on your resume, and you will get 20, 30 minutes of questions just about what's on your resume. And then there are other people, like me, frankly, who will be asking you questions off your resume. I'm I'm going to want to just get you involved in a conversation. And it may have nothing to do with the job, nothing at all, because I want to see what kind of a person you are, whether you're the kind of person that would be enjoyable to work with late at night if we've got a filing due. Are you a robot, or are you somebody who can have a good conversation? How do you prepare for that? It's hard. What I will tell you is two things. Number one, be natural. Just be yourself. Don't try and play a role. Don't try and be someone you're not in an interview. If you try to play a part that you're not comfortable with, it's going to show. Be who you are. Act the way you would normally act around the dinner table with your friends, with your parents' friends. And, frankly, read the newspaper a few days before the interview. Make sure you know what's going on in the world. If you're interviewing for colleges, read the student newspaper of the college you're interviewing with, so you know what issues are hot on campus. Why do I say these things? Because your interviewer might ask you. Most interviewers are going to steer very far and wide from politics these days, but they might ask you about the World Series. They might ask you if you like the Rays in 7 or the Dodgers in 6. And if you don't know what they're talking about, whether it's fair or not, people may make judgments about that. Be prepared to talk about your hometown, and listen for things. Listen for things like accents. You may interview with somebody for a job, and you may pick up that they said banana. And that may be an opening and say, "You from upstate? You from the Rochester, Buffalo area?" You never know. You need to listen for things like that. You need to find little ways to connect with your interviewer, because they're going to be looking for ways to connect with you. And there are lots of human resource guidelines now that you're going to interview places that tell the interviewer not to ask you personal questions. But a lot of people are still going to do it because they're trying to find a connection with you that's different than other people. And that's why I say, be yourself, be conversational, be natural as much as you can in a job interview, which is an inherently unnatural environment. Looking at the chat box.
Christine was giving a suggestion. Christine, I don't know if you can unmute or if you want me to read it.
No, I just know that if you're in an interview and you need to use notes, using upright clipboards to either side of your computer is really helpful, because it still allows you to look into the camera, and without having to move your head, you can still see your notes, and it is very helpful.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of a second monitor, but that may be a push for you guys. But they're cheap now. They absolutely make that easier. It's no question.
And I had just suggested that I find that when I'm in Zoom meetings, which are similar to, the attention that you need to give, similar to being in an interview, that I find it really helpful to close anything that I had open on my computer, make sure that my Outlook isn't open, that any automatic notifications are turned off so that you don't find yourself distracted, and to turn away your cell phone. So if you were in an in-person interview, you wouldn't take your cell phone out of your bag or out of your pocket. And when you're on a Zoom interview or in a Zoom meeting, it's best to put your phone on silent and put it on the other side of the room so that you're not tempted to pick it up during your interview.
Yeah, I can tell you, if a phone goes off while I'm interviewing somebody for my law firm, you're done. Because that tells me that you don't know, you wouldn't be able to turn your phone off walking into a courtroom either. But yeah, 100%, Lori.
Great. Well, does anyone have any last questions? I just want to spend the last few minutes talking about what our next steps are. And if I want to make sure that if anyone has any last questions for Alan, that we get those in. Awesome. Alan, I can't thank you enough for spending the past hour with our staff and with our young leaders. This has really been a really wonderful session, and I hope that you guys have found it helpful. So I apologize that there was confusion with our emails, and I think I've got everyone's email address correct. So in the next couple of days, you'll receive a copy of this Zoom recording, because there were several staff who have class tonight and weren't able to attend, but it asked to be able to listen in. And our next session, some of you who, if you're eligible to be a junior counselor this summer, you should have received an invitation for a meeting this Sunday at 4 o'clock. If you can't attend that, don't worry, we will record it and send it out. And then our next general staff get together for our next session is on Thursday, November 5th, again at 8 o'clock. And that's when Neil, Amy, and myself will be talking about the organizational structure for summer 2021 and what opportunities there are for jobs. So we'll go through all of the different jobs at camp, the structure that may look different from what it was in the past, and how you can navigate our online application system. And then our last session will be on Thursday, November 12th. Again, at 8, we'll record again. And that's on how COVID-19 impacts your employment, and us just having a really honest conversation about how COVID might impact the way that camp runs this summer. And I'm hoping to be able to have some of the staff who were at camp this past summer sit on a panel to answer questions about what we did, and for us all to brainstorm on how we can hopefully make summer 2021 really fantastic, even if we have some COVID limitations. So as always, please feel free to reach out to me if you guys have any questions. You all have my cell phone number and my email. Thank you again for joining us, and for Alan for being our fantastic first guest, and stay tuned for an email from me in the next couple of days. Have a great night, guys.
Thank you.
Let's go Rays.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Get back to baseball, Alan.
Had to get it back.
Thank you.
Thank you. You guys have a good one.